The one thing that really stood out to me in the past year of my reading about pedagogy and instructional design is that the social context, the social connection that students have with each other and with their instructor is equally as important as their connection with the content of the course. And that there is a significant amount of research that supports that. And so whether it's framed as a mental health way of conceptualizing that connection, or as a way of just framing it as a social dynamics that are informed by mental health. I think coming with research for some instructors helps them connect with, or it gives traction to this idea that this is actually this is research proven necessary conditions for learning to happen.
So thanks everyone for making time in your schedules. We know that it is a really busy time in this semester, and thank you for showing up, and thanks for the speakers today as well. We are hoping to get you to think a little bit and to also share with us a little bit about mental health, how we maintain that online. And we have 3 guest speakers today. So we have Alexandra, Marina, and then Francis, who will be approaching like mental health and sharing some of the things that they do to encourage mental health in their classrooms through assessments or through other types of practices. And we are hoping to have a discussion at the end. Just as a reminder, this session is being recorded, and the recording and the resources will be available for you on the site that Francis has made available. So I think, Alexandra, you are going to lead us off also with like a brief land acknowledgement as well.
Yes. Hi, everyone. So before I get started with my own take on the topic for today, we wished to take a minute to acknowledge the land, right? We're now in a virtual land here, but really the university itself sits on the land of that for thousands of years have been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. But we also want to recognize that this is still the home of many Indigenous peoples. And we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land, but also to acknowledge that statements like this are often imperfect ways to acknowledge the history of colonialism in Canada and the continuing plight of Indigenous peoples, not only in Toronto, but across the country. I myself have to acknowledge being a person of European settler background, but settler on a different colony, the Portuguese colony of Brazil, where I grew up with very, very little knowledge of the history of Indigenous peoples in my home country, beyond very general stereotypes and romanticized notions. Now I call Canada home, and a land with its own complicated history. So I just invite us to think about that for a minute, and to, for those of us who haven't yet check out the responses to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls for actions, and think about what ways can we contribute to that. Now, in terms of the topic for today, if I may share my screen for a minute, I just have a few slides to keep me in check. So I'm here to talk a little bit about my approach to try to promote mental health in the classroom. But before I talk about what it means, I wanted to just go over what my context is here at the university. I mostly teach first-year students in 3 different contexts. One is within New College. I'm involved in 2 different programs. One is the International Foundation Program, which is a transitional program for international students who are conditionally admitted to the university, but come in with slightly slower test scores in their English language abilities. So they take this program to bridge that gap, and the program involves taking my class and 4 other courses. And at the end, if they pass, they continue on into the university. So, but these are first-year students coming in with English as a second language. And that class that I teach usually has between 200 and 300 students. And the other program that I'm involved in is the New One program, which is one of the College One programs. I coordinate that program and occasionally teach one of the seminars in it on digital technology and society. And this year I'm co-teaching a first-year course in the history department on the histories of violence. But in all these 3 contexts, I'm dealing with first-year students, right, from across the Faculty of Arts and Science. Now, working with both first-year students and international students for the last 10 years or so has made me think a lot about sort of the psychological hurdles that are involved in transitioning into university. You know, I can't even begin to imagine what it must be like to be 18 years old and travel across the world to start your university degree in a different country, in a different language. Sometimes, often the very first time you're away from home. I mean, just going from high school to university is enough of a transition. So over the years, my approach has been based on thinking about these questions, what it means, like on a psychological level, to deal with that, but also thinking about mental health more broadly, since I've had a number of family members that have struggled with that as well. So my approach has been based on a sense of both empathy, but what others have started calling a pedagogy of kindness. And I first heard of the term through the work of Kate Denial, but others have used it as well. So I left Kate's site there. She's working on a book right now, but a lot of some of the basic ideas and some of her practices are outlined in her blog on the website on the screen there. And one of the things she emphasizes in this is that what she means by pedagogy of kindness doesn't mean just being nice, right? Because niceness can be a band-aid solution. It means it's always often about justice and also about believing people and believing in our students' abilities as well. So to me, it means trying to get to know my students, trying to listen to them, being aware that they are adults that have complicated lives, trying not to make personal judgments or assumptions about where they are in their lives and what their priorities are, and also not taking personally how they engage or not engage with my own classroom, right? Now, what that means in practice, because we have limited time here, I thought about trying to think of a couple examples to talk about. And this year especially has been really about flexibility and communications. And this is something that also came up in my conversation with students about what might be important to them this year, what could help. So the flexibility side comes across in assignments, obviously, right? And some of the approaches that I use in assignments are things that I've used in small classes, but also in larger classes. And one way of looking at it is to think about deadlines. Deadlines and the assignments themselves are always things that are a lot of sources of a lot of anxiety for students, especially first-year students who are doing all the things for the first time. So I do have deadlines, But I'm also very flexible in communicating with my students about, okay, now this is when it's due. I don't have any late penalties on things. But if anything happens that prevents you from submitting on that deadline, reach out, and then we're going to find some way to make it possible for you to do this assignment. Now, this used to be sort of my policy before. This year, I started also thinking about that sometimes it's hard for students to come and disclose some probably complicated issues that may have come up, which then means they have to come up with some other reason to, ask for an extension, because perhaps the real reason might be something that they're not comfortable in disclosing. So I started experimenting with what a friend came up with is life happens extensions, where you come up with a certain number of days. Came up with 7 days, but this can be anything. So there's 7 days of life happens extensions you can use at any point. You don't have to say what it is. You just contact your TA or contact myself and say you want to use some of these life happens extensions, 1 day, 2 days, 7 days, however many days you need. And then you get that automatically granted. So that was what my plan was at the beginning of the year. But with the pandemic going on, I become, you contact me, we work it out. And there's been some crisis already with students really struggling, because I think some of the students who were doing okay before now suddenly found themselves, they've never done online learning before, and found that they had an impact on them that they didn't really predict. Right? I had students struggling with migraines because of all the time on screens, and then suddenly they couldn't do their work because they had to take breaks from the screen. And so there's all these unpredictable things that were happening. And so sometimes it meant that they were a month late, or, I teach a full year course, so a month is not going to kill anyone. So I become much more flexible with students, and allowing them to tell me as much or as little as they want, but also trying to connect them with the resources that they may need. And allowing time in class for the assignments as well, because sometimes it's easy to, with all the things that are coming at you, to forget, right, until the week the assignment is due. So I keep talking about the assignment all the time, and allowing some time in class to go over things, to allow students to look at things, or maybe even work on it for some time in tutorials or in class, so that it's always there in the back of the mind. And then it's a little easier to get started on it, right? With the help of the whole class. So in practice, it hasn't been a disaster in terms of like no one submitting things on the deadline. Nearly everyone submits on the deadline, with then the people that really need some help being the ones that then I have to follow up with and see how I can help. And community is important as well, because, with first year students, they don't have a community yet. And that was something that really worried me at the beginning of the year, and still worries me in many ways. So I had to try to find many different ways to help people feel comfortable in the classroom, to get to know one another. Music has helped. I've never done this before, but this time around, I asked students at the beginning of the year, when we did an introduction post in the discussion board, to submit, a favorite song. And then I compiled all of these into a Spotify list, and I play from that list every beginning of every class while we're waiting for everyone to come in. And because these are songs submitted by the students, they tend to be popular amongst the other students. And then someone posts on the chat, oh my God, it's, I don't know, Shawn Mendes, or it's Blackpink, I love this song. And then they start talking about the song, and then they realize that there's another student that likes that song. And then it actually created a really nice vibe in the classroom. So the chats have become a lot more fun in that way. So I noted that in my larger classes that went quite a long way. And now we found out that one of the students in the class produces his own music. So he shared his Spotify list. So then you have other people asking us to play his songs, and then we play his song. And then now he has a fan club in the class. And I think this is something I'll probably carry on in even when we go back into the classroom. But that has definitely helped. And it helps in other ways too, because one of the things students have talked to me about is that they're always told when they come to university that, their professors are going to be very sort of distant and not really care about them. And that prevents them from actually reaching out because they're afraid of rejection, right? And so if you put that friendly face and keep reminding them that you're there, that they can reach out to you, that you can, come and talk to you, that can give the message that they should feel safe to reaching out. So this is one thing one of my students mentioned, that it's not enough to just post a list of resources at the beginning of the year, but be constantly reminding them and asking them if they're okay goes a long way to help them feel that someone cares, that they're not just a number. This is the thing that they keep telling me, sometimes they feel they're just a number, and that prevents them from actually reaching out when they need. But I'll stop there because I'm beyond my 10 minutes here. And we can talk more about this when we get to the discussion at the end. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Francis and Marina now.
All right, thanks so much, Alexandra. And there are a lot of comments that you might want to go back and check out in the chat. So thanks for sharing, and we will try to leave some time for some questions. I have a ton of questions for you myself. So I think, Marina, if you're ready to go, if we could hear a little bit about some of the practices that you engage with your students.
Sure, thanks, Bill. And Alexandra, that was great. I always love hearing from Alexandra. I'm actually new to teaching. I'm coming from a mental health perspective. So I'm a clinical psychologist, really excited to start teaching. But I find myself kind of coming from a little bit of a different perspective. And I'm so excited that there's so much interest in providing that mental health support and mental health focus in education. All right. So I come from, as I said, a mental health perspective. And so for me, in the back of my mind, I have this focus on the model that I base the idea of stress, right? So there's a model that's been sort of based on a lot of clinical research. And we could think of stress as sort of divided into, and it's not as straightforward as this, but we can sort of see it as a model of, there's positive, tolerable, and toxic stress, right? So it might be counterintuitive to think of stress as positive, but actually, and I always make sure the students understand this model, because some stress is unavoidable, and there is some stress that can be positive, right? To get us going on things, to motivate us to study or to get things done. There's tolerable stress, which is serious but temporary stress responses, and it's buffered by supportive relationships. And I used to think of COVID as this tolerable stress, but I think the longer it kind of goes on, the more it kind of goes into that category of a little bit of toxic stress, because it is having a lot of impact on mental health. But hopefully with the right supports, and this is what the research is showing, which I'll very briefly summarize right now, we're sort of able to overcome a lot of the stressful factors right now with the right approach, with the right supports. So this is like my very brief part of the research. So first of all, I always make it clear to the students, and I always sort of start out with the mental health component. Anxiety, feeling these emotions that they're feeling, it's all normal responses to these abnormal circumstances. Online learning makes it harder to see when a student is experiencing mental health issues, right? So there is research to show that, when you do online learning, it isn't as easy, right, to connect with students. And by the way, as an aside, I do apologize if you hear noises in the background. I have all my 3 kids home today. We're in quarantine, so there's that stressor. So if you do hear interesting noises in the background, that would be why. Some of the research that's coming out now, I just wanted to share it briefly. So it's a lot of research that I follow on children and youth because that's my specialty area. And the research that's showing is that on the positive side, a lot of youth are starting to, there's an increase in terms of their calls to the crisis lines, right? So it may be seen as a positive because they're reaching out, and there's reduction in emergency department visits. But we also know that those individuals that have been struggling before COVID, those with mental health difficulties to begin with, the pre-existing conditions, they are not faring as well, right? So things have deteriorated for those individuals in particular. And this is just briefly a study that by Kate Lister from UK that I thought I really liked this graph, how she divides it. And this was not specifically on COVID, but specifically on online education. And showing that, on the one hand, there's, on the upper side, there's a lot of positives, right? So, people, 64.8% of students found the people in their life helped their well-being, right? So there's a lot of good things going on for them as well, online learning, but you could see, the 71.9% of students disclosing mental health conditions when they do online learning. And there's more to it than that I won't get into, but if you guys are interested, I can share some resources around this study. But I thought it was a nice visual to put here as a way to just keep in mind that online learning is not what the students sort of had expected. As Alexandra had said, this isn't, when they're coming into university, a lot of these students are expecting a very different experience, right? So this is a little bit different, so being mindful of that. So what I do in my class is self-care, and checking in each class is just part of our routine, right? So what I do, and I'll show you some of the visuals. I really like visuals. I think it's a really important piece of it. I do different ways of checking in. So this is just one way, and this is COVID specific, as a way to sort of look at a continuum of where they're at in terms of coping, right? So you could see here on one end, you have the green piece where they're feeling like they got this, they're feeling calm, they're able to take things in stride. What I like about this table is that it actually takes into account not just the emotional component, but also the physical, right? So there's the sleep patterns and the appetite. Those are like some of the first things to start deteriorating with higher stress, right? And then as you progress through this graph, right, there's, increased tension, lower energy, there might be trouble sleeping or eating, right? So starting to notice and checking in with themselves is really important. Now, this graph might not work for everyone, so I introduce them to different ways of checking in each session. So here's another way. So this is just my own acknowledgement. It's normal to have a smaller window of tolerance during stressful times. And I talk to them a lot about, in part, my course is focused on mental health, but I do talk a lot about, this window of tolerance and how we all have that. And when we reach our own tolerance, and each one is individual, right, based on our stressors, it is easy to, that idea of flipping our lid, it's easy to lose it. It's easy to go into emotional mode and not have the ability to get ourselves into a calm place, get ourselves into ability where we could think clearly. I introduced them to, different emotional vocabulary. You'd be surprised, even as adults, how difficult it is sometimes to be emotionally aware where we're at, right? So checking in with ourselves and knowing that these feelings, they're all temporary, right? They come and go, and it's important to acknowledge that, kind of like ocean waves, right? They come and go, and it's important to see that we could have more than one feeling at the same time. So I've had, people say, well, I'm feeling really sad right now, but at the same time, I'm feeling hopeful, or I'm feeling optimistic, right? So there's a lot of ways to sort of check in, but this is one other way just to build their emotional vocabulary to be able to explore some of this. This is just a humorous one for those of you that like the Muppets. Today I feel, and it's just very simple, just sort of similar to the emotional vocabulary in terms of the feelings wheel, just kind of checking in with themselves. Where are you at? What are you feeling today? What are you thinking about? It's really important to be reflective in this process and to be checking in with each other. Feelings thermometer is another tool that I use a lot with clients, but I've introduced it to my students as a way for them to sort of see that, you know, we might be feeling anxious, but where are we at, right? We could be, you know, things are still kind of going okay for us, but as you could see in this thermometer, it's sort of measuring the intensity of our emotion, right? So we could be going up and down on this feelings thermometer throughout the day, but it's important to notice when we're getting kind of above that 5, and then we could use our tools to get ourselves back down. So it's helpful, it's beneficial in that reflection process and in checking in. And this is one of my favorites. So I really like the work of Daniel Siegel, and he talks a lot about different components that help us be at our best. And so this is the Healthy Mind Platter for Optimal Brain Functioning. And these are things that I also check in with them at, right? These are things I want them to reflect on, even if they don't always share. It's good for them to start kind of reflecting. And some days they might have more of some of these things and some days less, but it's good to be aware of the components, and you know, awareness is key, right? The more you're aware, the more you become sort of, you know, oh, okay, so maybe I can do more on this physical time, or maybe I can do a little more on my downtime today, right? So just checking in with ourselves and reflecting. I also start off, after we do this check-in, I always start off with a mindful meditation. My course is focused on mindfulness, so that's in part relevant, but I use a lot of mindfulness in my work with clients. So I've started using it with students. We practice, I guide them through different practices, and then we sort of talk about that experience. And if we have time, I can talk about, you know, some of the important aspects that I speak with them about in terms of these practices. I always make sure they know that they can stop at any point, because some of these practices could be triggering, right? We're all different, and the way that we respond to these practices is different. But the intention there is just to teach them some tools that they can use to be present with themselves, to be mindful, to be present. And for some of them, it could be a way to relax, right? To de-stress. And this is an example, an extension of, you know, based on this mindfulness practice. I really wanted to do something that incorporates practice and research, right? When we're in academia, we want to, I'm very passionate about research, so I think it's always good to connect the two. So one of my assignments is focused on, it's a 2-piece assignment. So the first piece gets them to present something, and it's been really interesting to see their presentation, something that they've chosen as a mindfulness meditation practice. So I challenge them to start using that practice as a part of a daily way of kind of being, including it in their routines, and then reflecting on that. So the reflection papers are based off of that practice, right? So what is going on for them? What are their experiences with that practice? And then linking it back to some of the literature that we've discussed, some of the research that's out there. Is it consistent? Is there things that they're finding challenging that maybe the literature doesn't pick up on, right? So it's always really interesting to see the connections they're making, and it helps them engage more in the literature, but it also gets them to practice the skills, right? To really learn about mindfulness and mental health, you really have to practice it. So, you know, and it's important to know that part of the process of kind of looking out for themselves, being reflective, is the importance, as you know, I think Alexandra has already mentioned this, flexibility with deadlines, right? So I'm always very open to that with these papers, for example, the mindful reflection papers. So I've given them 5 reflection papers, but I've given them over 7 weeks to complete them. So they can choose to submit all 7. They could choose to submit 5, but if they submit 7, I count only 5 of their best papers, right? So this gives them an opportunity to sort of start seeing, okay, is this the right approach? I go over it a lot as well in class, just to answer any questions. I try to provide examples of what I'm looking for. But by giving them those options, it gives them an opportunity to built on, if 1 week they didn't really understand the assignment, the goal, they really take that feedback and they can do better next week. Okay. And the importance of providing positive, constructive feedback, right? So even if things are not going well, even if things are incorrect, always starting with something that is going well for them, right? Because they're trying. Those that are submitting, they're trying, right? So it's really important to acknowledge their efforts and provide constructive feedback. So, please, Bill, stop me if I'm going too long, because I've forgotten when I started. So if I'm going over time, feel free to cut me off. Do I have a little more time?
Actually, if you're okay with it, Marina, there are a lot of comments about some of the different things that you've been putting up here.
Yeah.
So if we could come back to the discussion point at the end, I'm sure that there are lots of questions, there are lots of things that people want to discuss. And thanks for really emphasizing checking in with students, having that flexibility and everything else. And we'll look forward to having that discussion in a few minutes. And Francis, I'm hoping that you're also ready to go. And
so thanks so much to Bill, who really inspired this workshop, and to my co-presenters who just gave me so many great ideas that I can't wait to implement, and to everyone who's here in attendance. I'm going to go right into some specific classroom practices that I've been working on over the last year, or a little more than a year, to support student mental health. And I'll start by saying that all of this comes out of my own growing interest in two main bodies of research. One is trauma-informed pedagogy, and the other is pedagogical work on designing for care. And both of these are really about how to build inclusive learning communities. But since we don't have too much time now, I've created a video actually that explains a little bit about both of these. Both of these bodies of research from my own understanding, and then goes into more detail about how I've been trying to work with them in my classes over the last few years. So after today, if you want to learn more about these ideas, what they are, how they can be useful, you can go to that address there and learn more, and also see a list of references. And this is where I'll put the recordings of today's talks here. So today, since you can learn more about my thoughts on those more general topics somewhere else, I'm going to limit my presentation to just a really quick description of 5 assignments that I've used in the last year. And what I've done in all my classes is to totally redesign my assignments and assessments to foreground developing skills for well-being. So what I have to say today isn't so much directed at helping students in your classes who are struggling right now, which is a conversation I think we could definitely have and would be super important. But instead, now I'm going to talk about taking a kind of long-term approach at the level of course design. So I'm asking, how do we think about designing our courses from the get-go to focus on student well-being? So I'll just go through a few examples of how I've done this one by one. The first thing is what I call audio walks. So each week in my classes this past couple years, I've been providing one or more audio lectures, either by me or one of the authors we're studying. And students are encouraged to listen to these while going on a walk outside. Many students know, as we've been talking about, that they're spending too much time on their screens now, and they quickly learn that walking outside regularly is a really great self-care activity. To contextualize this assignment, and hopefully motivate them to do it like this, I give them some research that shows how you can think and problem solve better while on a long walk. So unless they really can't go out, they're asked to download the audio onto their phones, put on headphones, and go for a walk while they listen to these lectures. So I've done this in a number of courses over the last few years. So this is an example of a specific skill for well-being, walking outside, ideally in nature, that I'm integrating into the class as an assignment. So the next example is, last fall I taught a class called Biohacking Breath in the Department for the Study of Religion, which turned out to be held online. In that class, students did 2 intentional breathing practices series at home. Each series lasted for 5 weeks, and they did 15 minutes a day, at least 5 days a week. And they followed instructions provided by these experienced practitioners that I had recorded before the class started. And then they maintained a record of their work in a practice log, which documented what they did, how long they spent doing it, how they felt, how they felt it to have or not have an impact on their life or their schoolwork. Then they reflected on those experiences more substantially in journal writing assignments throughout the semester, where they integrated the practice experience with the course readings. So this is another specific skill for well-being that I integrated into the class as an assignment. And in this case, I actually designed the whole class around the skill itself. The next one is what I call microphenomenological reflection. So this is a writing assignment. And in these writing and thinking assignments, students think about their changing or multiple understandings of things like self or experience in relation to course materials and their own lived and embodied experiences. So this is a practice of active philosophical thinking, where students are deeply thinking about their subjective experience in the context of their own historical, educational, and cultural circumstances. These reflections are then brought into class discussions so that the students' individual voices and life experiences are rich sources of, these are the data for consideration and discussion in the class. This type of work is familiar in some philosophy and cognitive science courses and research projects, where it's sometimes called microphenomenology, which is a subdiscipline that facilitates close exploration of lived experience. This experiential module was implemented in a number of my classes over the last few years. So as far as the principles of trauma-informed teaching go, which are listed here on the slide, for me, this assignment facilitates student empowerment by allowing student voices and experiences to stand at the center of their learning. It also supports experiences of safety and trust in the classroom, since it demonstrates that what they think really matters to me. And student empowerment, safety, and trust also then can help facilitate resilience, growth, and change, as well as action towards social justice. So this has been a really important kind of writing assignment in my teaching over the last few years. The next example is something I called speaking out and listening in. This is an assignment where students conduct 4 conversations with 2 different people, and they are asked to actively witness their thoughts and emotions while maintaining a focused attention on what they're hearing from the other person when they're in the role of the listener, and then they change roles. This is a widely known and well-studied practice that takes different forms in different situations. It's similar to something in socially engaged Buddhism called bearing witness. It shares features of a listening circle found in many indigenous communities. And as part of anti-oppression pedagogies, it's sometimes called embodied listening or mindful listening or deep listening. So I'm doing this assignment in my current class right now on meditation and race in North America. So as far as the principles of trauma-informed teaching, which are again listed on the slide there, this assignment really addresses all of these, I think, but maybe there's a stronger emphasis on connection and support, since it creates bonds between students and their conversation partners. And in my mind, what I'm trying to think about is not only creating community in the classroom itself, but also about creating opportunities and teaching skills for students to learn to build connection and community with other people outside the classroom, which I think especially nowadays is something we can do. And finally, the last thing I'll describe is a self-care assignment. So this is now underway in my current course. It's worth 15% of the final grade, and it's going to be self-graded. Students are following a protocol developed for by the University of Buffalo School of Social Work for developing a self-care plan. They study a bunch of resources and complete some work where they identify some things they value and they need, and they complete what's called a maintenance self-care plan, and then some other things that they can do when they experience a crisis. And then they have an emergency self-care plan, which they are asked to write on a card and keep in their wallet or their backpack or something. And unfortunately, a bunch of students have been using their emergency self-care plan this semester already. So this one is kind of the most obviously connected to student well-being. I'm doing this for the first time this semester, and so far it's positive. I'm getting positive feedback, I think. I'm doing it on in a class on the role of race and racism in North American Buddhism. And so some of the readings and concepts are emotionally very difficult to deal with. And so my thinking is partly that just like to write a research paper, you might need some scaffolded assignments on library research and citation practice to do your best work. Similarly, to be able to critically confront and work on difficult topics and experiences like racism, there are some self-regulatory, self-care, and attention-focused skills you need to have to be able to do your best at that kind of work. So I think I'll stop there and leave time for discussion.
All right, thanks so much, Francis. And I guess one question that I had also was very similar to Kathy's. If we could start with your presentation. So what would you recommend? Love the idea, and I think many of us do, of getting students away from screens, using those little audio lectures. What about individuals who are maybe mobility impaired or really don't have that access? Any ideas on how to approach that?
Yeah, obviously that's a problem. I do have a problem for that assignment. I mean, I do have students in that situation, and they do the assignment at home, you know, with their eyes closed, lying down. I had some bedridden students last semester, and they even said they enjoyed being able to just close their eyes and listen to their homework instead of looking at the screen. So for sure, people can do this in different ways, I think. Okay, I don't know. I don't feel totally thrilled about the audio walk thing. I'm worried that maybe I'm being a little ableist to even sort of suggest this as an assignment. Although on the other hand, people who do it really love it. So if anyone has suggestions, I'd be happy to hear that.
Well, again, I can't speak for everyone, but I think the same sort of idea for everyone to kind of get away from screens, and it doesn't have to be like a full 2-hour lecture, which I don't think is the intent of like what you're trying to get students to do, but even like smaller clips where they're just like spending time walking. And I don't know if you're referring to Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast, Walking Slow or not, but I think there's a lot of evidence around, you know, walking and listening and thinking. They really are synergistic. So I think at this point, if we can just open it up to just any general questions that you have, or if we missed something in the chat, I think the resources will be available for you if everyone here agrees, like Alexandra and Marina, some questions about the resources on the different slides. Are there any general questions? Kathy?
Looking for the right button. Yeah, I just wanted to tag on to what you just said. I love the idea of the walk, and I was also thinking about how we could contextualize it differently. And I would imagine that it could be, you know, like even an encouragement to, if you can't walk, get outside and listen to it, you know, in your yard, or listen to it on the front steps or something. And if you can't get out of bed, shut your eyes and imagine that you are walking. And I think, you know, I'm not up on all the research, but I have the sense that there is research on just being outdoors being good for us, and that even imagining being outdoors or seeing pictures of the outdoors can help. Or even, I mean, we're trying to get away from screens, but even like put up a landscape picture on your computer and look at that while you're listening. So I think there's definitely ways to adapt for it. I was just curious if you had specific things that you were already building in, or if you were doing it on a like one-by-one kind of basis.
More one-by-one, but I like your suggestion that I reframe it entirely and not call it maybe an audio walk, but think of another way to do it, just so as not to sort of make people self-conscious who don't walk. But we did have a whole thing in one class about plants, house plants. And so people who couldn't get outside to be in nature, they had their little nature spot in their room with their house plants.
I love that. Be in nature with the plants.
So if I could ask a question, because, and sorry, Paul, if I could get to you in 1 sec, I just had a question for the panel in general. There's a lot of great ideas about flexibility and for having different assignment deadlines, but I'm thinking of it in practical terms. especially for large classes, like how do you kind of balance having that flexibility, which I think is useful for students, and I think it does show that compassion for students and that culture of care for students, but also like the well-being of yourself, your teaching team, like your TAs, and just making sure that you can accomplish everything in a timely way to end your courses on time, for example, without stressing yourself out.
Right. I think, well, there's a few things. One thing that made it possible to be more flexible without the students running into too many problems and myself or my TAs running into too many problems is that in some of my classes, we have kept more or less the same sort of number of assignments to be not too many, you know, like, so there's lots of time in between things. So in the class that I teach in the history department, for example, it's a 4-year course, but in the fall, there was one very small assignment at the beginning of the term, and then 2 other ones towards the end. So the grand total of 3 assignments in the whole term, and there's 2 in the winter. And then there's a big gap then between whatever we had due in December until the next assignment, which is coming in now in March. And so there is time to make up for things in between that. In other classes, then the timing becomes an issue because my assignments tend to be scaffolded. So then they are step 1, step 2, step 3, right? So one builds into the other one. So I try to work with my students from the very beginning on why they have to come in and the dates that they have to come in. What do I need to do with that assignment so they can get it, so they can then do the next step. And so emphasizing the importance of those specific dates, and also keeping in mind all the other commitments that they have, right? So if they get postponed indefinitely, they may run into other problems when it conflicts to other things. And so I found that it's only very few people that end up needing that accommodation.
Paul, so nice seeing you. Did you
Yeah.
have a question?
Our largest course this semester in computer science is 1,600 students with 55 TAs spread across, I think, 7 sections, 6 or 7 sections. How do you, without a Herculean effort, maintain mental health among the instructors and the 55 TAs? How do you even track across 55 TAs, let alone the 1,600 students, and manage to intervene when appropriate in any kind of timely fashion?
That's a pretty tough question to address, I think. Don't know if any of the panelists have any suggestions. Do you have any suggestions, Paul? How are you going to approach it?
I don't know. I don't know how I'm going to approach it. We have a course in the fall that's even larger, and the people who run it are amazing. Throwing in mental health supports is absolutely a necessity, but I just don't know how to do it at that scale.
I just thought of one thing, maybe something that could happen amongst the TA team, like let's say, because there's so many, right, 54 TAs, but even in the class itself, you know, the Faculty of Arts and Science has a mental health programs officer. And I've invited him to come and give a workshop in the New One program, for example, on the 5 ways to well-being. It's a very popular workshop. Chadwin Jankowski is his name, and he is the best. And that set the tone right at the beginning of the year. One of the very first week we did that. And that's something that maybe you sacrifice an hour, and then maybe he comes back for 10 minutes later in the term to check in. And that could be something to just give a few tools, both for the TAs and for the students on things to keep in mind as they're progressing for the year. I know that might be one thing that could be done in a large context like that.
Okay, so I hadn't realized that Chad existed. I'm very much looking forward to
and I see a lot of people know Chad.
Yeah, there are a lot of fans. There are a lot of fans of Chad, and he was supposed to be here today, but unfortunately had prior commitments. I would definitely, and I hadn't thought of it, so thanks, Alexandra, of following up with him. So good luck, Paul.
Thanks.
Can I just jump in, Bill? If I could just add to what Alexandra was saying, I think the environment that we create kind of starting from lecture one, right, is really important. So even in a large classroom, you can still, you know, in addition to just providing the resources, the mental health resources and where they can go, just highlight the importance of mental health and highlight the importance of checking in with themselves, give them some tools to be able to kind of be reflective in their process. And that in itself sets the tone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Betsy.
Hi, I'm Betsy, and I teach a lot of people this semester. And I just wanted to make two comments that I've been noticing about students' mental health. And the first is that students are really struggling. This is obvious, and it's really affecting the kinds of questions that they ask and the kinds of expectations they have of their courses. And they're not asking for help often until it's kind of too late. And I have had students tell me that they don't deserve extensions. They don't feel like they deserve the support of the work that their group mates have done on group projects because they haven't themselves been keeping up with life. And having, I think, such a low beginning, a low self-regard in their own investment in their own education, it just breaks my heart. And I'm aware that that's just pervasive. I have hundreds of students this semester who are thinking this way about themselves. And related to that is that the students, because of the format of our teaching, and we don't expect them to use cameras, you know, they feel invisible. And on Tuesday, I was telling my students that they're not invisible to me and that I kind of know a lot about who they are. And gosh, like the chat, it was a voluntary live check-in session, but the chat just kind of blew up with people like, wow, you know who we are, you care. Like they were just, they're that feeling of invisibility. And I think we kind of know that, but using the word invisible helped me kind of zero in on things, because it's not me bringing a clinical diagnosis to something that I don't know what is their situation. And it's also not me telling them that they're necessarily, that they are, that they're weak. They're not weak. And they're actually very strong. They're incredibly resilient. And anyway, I just wanted to highlight a few of those observations that where they are and how we can build with what they're working with as learners.
Sorry, so just before opening it up to the panelists, because I'm sure they have a lot of thoughts about this as well. How do you kind of make sure that students in your class, Betsy, are feeling like they can get that support if they do reach out to you? Are there things that you do in your class? Is it something that you explicitly tell students that it's a safe space for them? I'm just curious how that gets communicated. And then not just our panelists, but like everyone in general, because I agree, like right now, it's a tough time for everyone because we all do feel a little bit invisible. We are speaking into the void an awful lot, and we don't really see like what's happening in that void either. So Betsy, anything that you do?
Yeah, well, and just adding to that sense of the void, it feels like a video game, right? Everything is so detached and dematerialized. So I always start any optional check-in session with a 5-minute sort of just, how's everyone doing? I talk about the coffee I'm drinking. I talk about maybe things that are happening with my family. They know that I have activities that are keeping me busy, but I also want to know what they're doing, what has changed for them, how they feel about the weather in their part of the world. My students are everywhere from Moscow to Beijing to Rio de Janeiro. So there's a lot of variety. And that's one thing. And then after I have a check-in session, I always send a recap message, because only maybe 10% of the enrollment is coming to the synchronous optional activities. And the recap message always includes me trying to boost and reinforce what they have going for them, what they've done so far, and underscore the benefit for them of doing the things that they need to do for the course and how they're sort of building on their own learning, so that they know how this is going to help them personally, not just because they're getting a grade for the course, but because this has really substantial application to their life in some way. And every module for every week always begins with with me with giving a couple of paragraphs of sort of personal comments about learning before getting into the real meat of the content. So those are some
Okay,
of the things I've been
thanks so
doing.
much. Yeah, no, thanks so much for sharing those, Betsy. Greatly appreciated. Francis, I know that you do a lot around trying to get students to share with you, not just to reflect. Are there any specific things that might be useful in trying to get students to share before it's too late?
I don't know. I think it's just built into so many of my assignments that I'm asking them to respond or to share as much as they might feel comfortable how they're doing, and then I write back to them. And so I have these kind of ongoing correspondences with many of the students about random things that aren't related to the class subject matter. And so I think it happens just by allowing it to be part of the class, actually. Part of the work of the class is to think about your emotional state in relation to your ability to study as a study skill, but also in relation to your ability to actually understand the material. And so I teach Buddhism, so somehow like it works for that kind of content matter, but I think it could work for other types of content too.
Okay, wonderful. Marina, did you have any thoughts about how to create those safe spaces where students might be able to feel like they can share openly? They might be in distress. They might be undergoing lots of mental health related issues. What sort of things might you recommend?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I think just part of it is creating that open environment. And I keep thinking, as I said, I'm more of a clinician and a researcher, and teaching is fairly new to me, but I feel like maybe I got lucky with my class, maybe not, but I have a very good group where they're very open and they discuss a lot of things, and discussions I have to time manage because it could keep going, which I think is a good thing because we learn from each other. But I think it's also setting that up at the beginning. And again, we can't do that in larger groups. My class is 40 people and half of them show up live. And then I do record the lectures so that they have them available for the other half that can't come live. But I think setting up that environment where they feel comfortable and it seems like they've developed that comfort to open up, but also, as Francis has mentioned, building that into some of the assignments. So having those reflective assignments where they are practicing some of these skills and being able to reflect on that is really important, because we want to get them to reflect. That's part of academic learning. It's not just, summarizing what the research is saying, but it's reflecting and connecting. So I think that's kind of my perspective on it.
And there are also like lots of really interesting observations and things being shared in the chat. And Sarah, I really love your comment about, just acknowledging that not all students are starting off in the same space and in the same place, and not making them feel awkward about reaching out for help or kind of having that perfectionism model in their heads. Alexandra, do you have anything that you might be willing to share about creating those safe spaces for students, especially like the larger classes? Because going back to what Paul was mentioning, U of T is trying to make sure that students in larger classes have that small class experience, but it's a challenge. And I agree with Paul, like it's a big challenge.
Yeah, so because from the beginning of when I started teaching, I wanted to, have interaction of some kind, promote some kind of engagement. And, if you're in a large lecture hall, that can be sometimes difficult. Students are shy. I mean, who's going to raise their hand and talk in a big lecture hall? So then I started experimenting with things that are more anonymous, so the clickers and the things like that. And then evolved into ones that allowed for a little bit more input, like, for example, tools like Poll Everywhere, where people can submit full, sentences and things. And we've been using them in the online classroom too. It's actually a little easier to do when we hold workshops. A new one, for example, we had a learning strategist asking the students about what are the things they're most anxious about, and then they could submit and upvote, the submissions from other students, and no one knows whose answer it is. So then it creates a little bit of a safe space in that way. But also students talked about how that was very helpful to them to find out that other people shared the same, concerns that they had. I think it seems for us who've been teaching for a while, we know what are the same concerns that, that the problems. For the student, they feel that they if they're having problems, it's only them, right? They're the imposter in that situation where, they should be figuring it out on their own. They should be knowing how to do things, and that's not really true. And so if we can find ways to normalize that, right? Normalize that, yes, this reading is difficult. If you found that it's difficult, if you didn't understand, that's totally normal. We're going to work on it together. And so try to normalize those feelings. I think it goes a long way. So there's tools that allow for that. So it's a matter of experimenting with some of them.
All right, thanks, Alexandra. So some great pointers there. Liza, not to put you on the spot, but I know that you've also been teaching large classes with several TAs, many different sections. And I just saw that in the chat that you had posted about being approachable and kind of conveying different ways in which you have tried to be more approachable to students. Would you mind sharing that a little bit more?
Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah. So what my current struggle is finding the ways to be most efficient, but also most human and approachable. So sort of where I can relying on tech so that I have the personal, mental resources to be a human in the places it counts. One thing that I'm finding is working for me and for my style is doing the most frivolous of check-ins. I've been having fun making BTS K-pop check-ins or a WandaVision check-in, stuff that I'm happy about. And then using that as a chance, just like Alexandra was saying, that it can be anonymous. So you can pick the saddest emotion or the disgruntledest looking cat on that picture. And then students can see that in each other, and almost never in a large class are you the only person picking one of these 9 pictures. There's usually good spread. So no matter who you are, you're not alone there. And then just kind of giving that space to either reflect where I am as well, oh my gosh, yeah, you guys are tired. I know the times and stuff is horrible. I'm tired today too, can kind of be a human. And then what I found working for me is going, but you know what, whatever you're coming in with, it's awesome that you made it here today. Thanks for spending this time. I hope this, maybe if I have hope for them that this will be an energizing, whatever I'm thinking about, but being the human in that moment, giving them the space to be human anonymously if they wish, but then they can have chat as well. And just recognizing that, hey, we're not on the top of our game today. Who's been on the top of their game for the last year? Ain't been me.
Mm-hmm.
Right, great. And I think that you're absolutely right. Being human and sharing that you're human with your students is really important. I'm also looking at your background, and I'm wondering if that's a box and whisker plot, or if that's something, okay, yay statistics and data science. Okay, and Sarah, again, I saw that you had posted some comments. Did you have anything that you wanted to share? I know that you've had a lot of experience around this pedagogy of care as well.
Oh, thanks, Bill. I am really enjoying listening to these amazing ideas. And I have lots of thoughts about, but I would really echo, I think, what a lot of people have said about that importance of being human and demonstrating that with students. I have a question that I'm struggling with, which is, and this is partly because I work in the Center for Teaching and Learning. It's such a delight to come to this and listen to all the amazing ideas. And then I hear from instructors, who are working in courses where there's a lot of resistance to, and where this isn't happening, and where there isn't this kind of support for students, and I wondered if anyone has ideas about how to speak to faculty, how to spread the word a little bit more. All of us here are here because we're interested or committed in, to some greater or lesser degree. And I am really, this is one of the questions I have, is how do we reach out and spread the word? Any thoughts, anybody? What is it? Are there things that we can say that about the value of this beyond the sort of, I find it hard because it seems so obvious what the value is to me and to the students.
Well, we have a really talented and a really bright group here who are all like very dedicated to student mental health and well-being and trying to make their classrooms open and accessible. So maybe we can just throw that open to everyone. Liza, I see your head nodding. Alexandra, I see your head nodding. Francis or Marina or anyone else, please feel free.
Betsy had her hand up over there.
And
I don't know
Betsy,
if
yes.
she was agreeing or.
Yeah, I was agreeing, and I was just saying that the one thing that really stood out to me in the past year of my reading about pedagogy and instructional design is that the social context, the social connection that students have with each other and with their instructor is equally as important as their connection with the content of the course. And that there is a significant amount of research that supports that. And so whether it's framed as a mental health way of conceptualizing that connection, or as a way of just framing it as a social dynamics that are informed by mental health, I think coming with research for some instructors helps them connect with, or it gives traction to this idea that this is actually this is research proven necessary conditions for learning to happen. That would be one thing, and then sometimes it's worth asking the other instructors who are resistant to this, why, and how are they doing, because they may not be doing very well.
Yes. So Sarah, I think that it's a real challenge to find those change champions. So I guess identifying those change champions and really highlighting them and having them kind of make those organic changes. It's a process for sure. Just being a little bit mindful of the time and respectful of everyone's time, and that we're getting close to sort of the 3:30 mark. Are there any last thoughts, comments, or questions? Again, I do encourage everyone to continue this conversation. Lots of great conversation, lots of great ideas. And I'm hoping that you'll all continue to network with each other. So Liza is just an outspoken champion down here at UT St. George for approachability, student access to professors. And Sarah is out at UT Scarborough, as well as Kathy Little and others. I do hope the conversation will continue on, but are there any last thoughts, comments, or suggestions? Seeing as there are none, I again will thank everyone for coming and spending your very valuable time where you may not have all of those social resources that you normally do have. It's really greatly appreciated. Lots of great conversations. Please do check in on the website that Francis has provided. Please continue to follow up. We all kind of wish you the very best in terms of your own health and well-being. I know it's stressful for everyone right now as well. Have a great week and have a great weekend, everyone. All right, take care.